Hi, I'm Ed. Welcome to Common Sense.
And I'm John. How are you doing, Ed?
I'm good, John. How about yourself?
Doing well.
We had fall here in New England on Monday, and now it feels like Savannah. It's about, I don't know, 90 and humid again out here. The weather's crazy.
I know everybody's complaining on the East Coast because it's just been one thing after another, and now there's more coming.
Right.
You can't win. Oh, well.
Well, let's have our argument today.
Yeah, except that we never seem to argue, but that's okay. So we have been talking a lot about this continuum of customer experience, both here in our discussions and also in our book, Common Sense Revenue Growth. But I think some of our readers and viewers may be just kind of thinking, well, this is a bunch of buzz right now, and not really understand why it's such a big deal. And there are books being written about it, and we're talking a lot about it ourselves. But the thing is that customer service and customer satisfaction has been an important goal for businesses for decades. And, what's new about this now? Why is there so much buzz? So why don't you get us started on that track?
Well, a place to start may be, I think, the difference between customer service and customer experience these days. It used to be that customer service was a customer experience where you had to walk into a store and deal with somebody, or you had to get somebody live on the phone, and that was the way it worked. But now the customer experience is formed really independent of customer service. There's a book that you've mentioned, Never Lose a Customer Again, by Joey Coleman, that talks about customer service as the assistance and advice provided by a company to those people who buy or use its products and services. On the other hand, customer experience is essentially defined as how customers perceive their interactions with a company. And so that interaction could be as part of researching or buying or trying to find some documentation or something independent of the service. And that is really a big difference. And it's one that we try to be precise in the language we use because subtle differences in words can actually make a big difference. And this is a place where that's the case. Customer service, let the sirens go by. Customer service is reactive, while customer experience is really proactive. And, I think auto attendants are the stuff of late night comedy now. And it's because we all instinctively understand it. Your call is really important to us stuff. That may be efficient service, but it's a crummy experience. It's like, fingernails on the blackboard. So when we talk in the common sense revenue growth perspective about customer experience, we're talking about a continuum that begins in the pre-awareness stage of the marketing funnel through awareness and consideration and decision and all that stuff, and all the way through the point of purchase and beyond that to retention, upsell, cross-sell, and even brand advocacy. And each step along that path, it's whether you think of it as a linear model like the old sort of a funnel, a circular model like the new flywheel that HubSpot talks about, or the cyclonic model that we've talked about that Square 2 Marketing talks about. The point is, whoever is in your customer-facing departments that's interacting with buyers virtually or in person have to be working together with the same message and the same philosophy. So it's about the buyer, but of course, in order to justify the investment, there's got to be something in it for the seller. So how would you describe what's in it for the seller?
Yeah, that's the tough part, right? It's one thing to commit to changing everything in your company to make it more customer centric or improve that customer experience, but you got to justify it. Nobody's going to make these improvements without knowing, that it's going to benefit them in a big way. So the book you mentioned, Never Lose a Customer, is really good because it's not just telling you why, it's also telling you how to get this done in a reasonable way. So as you point out all the time, there's really been a steady progression over the years across most industries in how to satisfy and retain customers. So I'll briefly review that. In the 60s and 70s, back then, if you purchased just about anything, there's a very good chance it would be broken before you'd gotten too many uses out of it. And that was because our manufacturing system really didn't address customer satisfaction or repair or anything else. So in the 80s, 70s and 80s, we came up with, the Japanese really came up with the Kaizen approach to automobile manufacturing, which really focused on zero defects, really solving the problem ahead of time, and really thinking about solving for the customer, to make things right in the first place. And that, of course, later evolved into more specific business process models like Six Sigma that all companies could adopt, regardless of industry. And that's really what shaped modern manufacturing, as you well know. I mean, it's still prevalent. The whole lean manufacturing thing is still out there. A lot of people think that's kind of the end game. But as we'll discuss, I think it's really not the end game. And then, so fast forward to the 2000s, manufacturing costs go down, shipping and logistics improve dramatically, and now companies are competing on price. So the Walmarts of the world are popping up and just destroying the competition because they can. And add to that 24/7, 365 customer service. And that became the new way to differentiate for your customers. So, nowadays, since really the late 2000s, the 2010s, the internet has really dominated. So we've got mobile and desktop devices. Everyone has them. Everyone demands a super high level of customer service, instantly to get pricing, to get returns, and it's all a very simple and easy sort of app-driven process. And that's what people expect nowadays. So companies that don't react well to those kinds of pressures are really kind of scratching their heads. So what do you think? Where do you think we are now with customer experience?
Well, I love your historical context, and I think that businesses today still struggle to meet this pressure from customer expectations. In fact, when you talk about that lean revolution, we talk of it as, well, buyers expected better quality, and so manufacturers addressed the buyer expectation. No, I believe what happened was different. That buyers started saying, we want quality, we want price, and we want short lead time. And manufacturers said, oh, that's crazy, you can pick two. But some manufacturers started to do it. And most of them didn't listen to it until they started to lose business and they were in jeopardy. And so then they went scrambling around and they started to figure out how to manufacture faster and better. But this fundamental thing of listening to buyers, in many cases, companies didn't get it. They think that now they're responsive because they fixed the symptom of low quality or long lead time. But of course, there's more to the story. And there are obviously huge economic benefits if you can improve that customer experience. Those come through a lot of the benefits or the value that's created by retaining customers. The marketing metric says that when you're selling to a new prospect, you have a 5 to 20% chance of winning the sale. But selling to an existing customer, that chance goes 60 to 70%. And there's a common statistic thrown around that it's 5 times, or some data says 6 to 7 times more expensive to acquire a new customer than to retain one. Some statistics say the lifetime value of retaining a customer can be 10 times the value of the initial sale. It's amazing. Some companies still don't track lifetime value. They don't know, how many reorders they get on average and stuff. Study after study has shown that customers across all industries prefer to do business with companies they already know. And buyers in the consumer space and the business space routinely say they're prepared to pay more for remarkable customer experience. That's not service. Again, that's back to this experience thing. Temkin, the huge industrial conglomerate, says a moderate increase in customer experience generates an average revenue increase of $823 million over 3 years for a company with $1 billion in annual revenues. So that's essentially 100% growth over 3 years just through improving customer experience. So it is a big deal. It's a big financial deal, and it's vital to everybody's success. It's just many companies that kind of think of NPS and these quantitative surveys that they do, they don't get it yet. So as you watch companies that are actually undertaking steps to not just talk about it but to improve it, what are you seeing companies that are effective what are they doing?
Well, I think it's tempting to, take it in an iterative, small steps improvement process over time. And
That all leads the answer to everything, right?
yeah, I mean, that $823 million increase is tempting, of course. But I think it's really going to take more than that, because, as you mentioned earlier, it's really a continuum of experience across every touch with a customer, beginning with pre-sales and going all the way through repeat sales and advocacy and all those things. So you really must rely on your people to reach out to customers and provide them with that help, as well as a very effective website and so on, early and often, across the entire spectrum. So I really think the best approach that companies are taking is doing a really comprehensive self-analysis, which includes feedback from your customers. Asking them what they want is kind of simple, but how many companies really do it?
Right.
So a lot of companies will do a net promoter score style survey and, get that direct feedback. That's good because it helps identify both strengths and weaknesses in a sort of quantitative way. But I think maybe a better way is what HubSpot is doing now at Inbound. I wasn't there, unfortunately, but apparently Dharmesh Shah, who's the co-founder of HubSpot, he spent his entire keynote talking about their new HubSpot customer code, which is the equivalent of a culture code, but it's really focused on what customers want, based on that self-analysis. And the customer code is like 10 commandments of how to treat your customers, very similar to how you treat each other in their culture code. So that's really a good idea. You're setting standards, you're setting expectations for yourself in how you treat customers across the board. And that's important because, like I said, you have to change mindsets. And to do that, you really have to get people to believe in what they're doing. So I like the way Joey Coleman does it in his book. He lays out really 8 stages of that continuum of customer experience. And I won't go into a lot of detail. I do recommend that people read the book. But he starts with the assess phase, in which, a potential customer identifies that they have a problem. It's like pre-awareness, and begins to evaluate options, including you. So what you do in that phase is critical to getting that customer, and has a lot to do with treating them the right way, the way they want to be treated. Then there's the admit phase, in which they narrow down the field. They ultimately, if you're successful, they choose you. You need some additional support in that phase, usually to help them over the hump. The affirm stage is when they have actually bought from you and wonder what's next. So there's kind of a buyer's remorse going on. And you got to catch that. You got to make sure they believe in you, and that they appreciate that, they're actually doing business with you, and make it clear that they're going to benefit, and what's coming. Activate stage is when you begin to work together towards solutions. So lots and lots of feedback, back and forth, little things that, help them feel better about how things are going. The acclimate stage is when you are actually getting used to working with each other. So it's more like a partnership now, and you really, need to cement that as often as you can. Don't just throw results at them and hope that, that's enough. There's still a personal touch that's required. The accomplished stage is when the customer achieves one or more of their goals, and little things like announcing that, making, sort of celebrating those accomplishments, not just sort of waiting for them to, give you an attaboy. Then there's the adopt stage, in which the customer and you really begin to deepen that relationship. Maybe you've now gone through another sale, an upsell or a cross sell, and they're doing, or maybe we've expanded to more divisions. And so all of that requires more, support across the board. And we're not just talking about, we're not just talking about responding to their questions. We need to be anticipating those questions and making sure they understand what's going on. And then finally, there's the advocacy stage, where the customer becomes what's, everyone calls a raving fan. and begins to provide referrals to your customers. So that's kind of when you get rewarded for all this work, and it's money. It's not just, feeling good. So what do you think about this model, Ed?
There's a lot of A's. I'm wondering what it's going to take to get to Z. It's all A's thus far, but certainly it's dramatically different than the kind of models we normally talk about in sales and marketing. I mean, and the premise of our common sense approach is that PR, marketing, sales, and customer service are essentially, they're, in the buyer's view, one. And so we need to think about organizationally how we do that. But instead, as long as we persist in having customer service as a cost center, where we're always trying to figure out how to drive down costs, and focus sales and marketing on what we want to do to somebody, it's hard to make progress on that model. And so, he's absolutely right. His framework sounds like helps people really think of it from the buying perspective. And you've talked about that book. I'm obviously going to have to put it on my list. You mentioned it a number of times. It sounds like a good one. So I guess the question is, what do we need to do for our mindset to support the buying process, rather than focus our mindset on the selling process? Many companies don't make it through the 8 stages that you outlined from that book. And often, they'll set up a hotline or chat bots or something that, again, kind of helps them cut down costs and think it helps them check the box to, quote unquote, provide service, but it's not reinforcing a relationship, and it's skipping a lot of the important steps. But based on everything you've told me about the book, I mean, clearly I'd say, in addition to the fact that I'm determined to read it now, it sounds solid because it gives such specific suggestions and tactics for actually improving the customer experience at each of the stages. In-person meetings, email, snail mail, phone calls, video, even token concrete items. I mean, I love the anecdote that you share from the book where the author, he was talking to somebody, I think selling some professional services, sitting in the office with a company CEO, and kind of the old thing, oh, the fish on your wall. He saw all the golf stuff in the office, but instead of just a fairly innocuous conversation about golf, when he got back to his office, he sent some sort of a token golf ball, I think with one of the major courses a guy wanted to play and hadn't, along with his proposal and a premise of the work he was going to do to the guy, and got the order. And in fact, if I remember the way you tell the story correctly, the guy didn't even look at the quote. He just said, okay, we're doing business together based on the golf ball. So on the one hand, it's a little bit kitschy. On the other hand, it's part of developing relationships with people. I think the takeaway is, consider who you're talking to first and make the experience remarkable. Is an overused word. It's like passionate and some of these others that everyone throws around now. But it's so easy in a world, where so many auto attendants say your call is very important to us, to really be different if you intend to and if you're deliberate about it. So, wherever you are in the customer continuum, it seems like that ought to be the goal.
Yeah, I love that story. And there's a bunch more stories just like that in the book that really are easy to relate to. So this is not, a big science fair, things that you've never heard of. It's really just kind of just being yourself and thinking about what it's like to be your customer. So, that's a good place to wrap up for today. And bottom line, I think the winners out there need to win at customer experience going forward, being very proactive and taking that extra mile. So thanks for joining us today. I'm John.
And I'm Ed. And our takeaway is make sure you differentiate between customer experience and customer service in your language and in your thinking. If you've enjoyed this conversation, check out our podcast. You can get to it through Riptide Press, or you'll find it on Apple Music or any of the other major podcasting platforms. It's Common Sense Revenue Growth. And you might be interested in our book as well, which you can buy at Amazon by going through commonsenserevenuegrowth.com. So I'm Ed, together with Common Sense. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Take care.